Sure thing. So I'm Emily Fairfax. I am an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities, and I am an ecohydrologist who studies the ways that beavers can create disturbance-resistant patches and can help us have a more climate positive future. So the talk today I'm going to give you might feel a little bit of a step outside the classic pollinator talk to start, but I promise by the end you'll see the connections. And the title of it is Beavers, Architects of Resilience. So I want to start off by just emphasizing that climate is changing. I probably don't need to convince the folks on this call of that, but the scale of change we feel is significant. Every single decade has been hotter than the last, and unfortunately, we're not seeing signs of this slowing down or stopping. This is a challenge for us in a lot of ways. It's not just that the air is hotter. We're seeing more and more natural disasters. They're more frequent, they're more intense, and they're harder for us to deal with. We're watching our forests and prairies and grasslands go up in smoke. We see our reservoirs, our lakes, and our rivers dry down every summer, sometimes in spring, when there's not enough water, and we enter those droughts. And unfortunately, when we do get that precipitation that sometimes we're so desperately wanting, it's too much all at once. And instead of it being good and useful and benefiting the ecosystem, we see that form floodwaters that put our cities and our towns and our properties under the flow. Now, this is a challenge for us, but humans are an incredibly intelligent species. We're very clever, we're very creative. We've engineered our way out of so many challenges in the past. What's one more challenge? But unfortunately, we've started to kind of realize this challenge might be a little too big for just us to deal with. We might need to be working with nature. When we think about working with nature, it just makes the most sense for us to start working with nature's engineers. So yes, I am talking about beavers. And I'm here to tell you that working with beavers is probably our best path forwards for dealing with these climate disasters and being the most efficient with our own time and our own resources and trusting nature's engineers to engineer what they're best at, and that's the rivers. So if you're thinking, hold on now, beavers and climate change. These are not words I typically put together in a sentence. This is not peanut butter and jelly. This is not salt and pepper. That's fair. It's not always a dinner time table conversation to say, oh yeah, so let's just talk about beavers and climate change. But after today's talk, I think it will be, at least more so than it used to. So to start off, I want you to think about what North American rivers look like today. This is a picture of the Mississippi, and it is a classic North American river. These are working rivers. We use their water for drinking water. We use it for agriculture. We develop around these rivers. We drain off the wetlands near these rivers. We recreate in these rivers. We fish from these rivers. These rivers largely have been meant to serve us for the last couple hundred years. And to make them do exactly what we want, we put a lot of control on them. We use concrete and rebar and structures to confine the river to specific places so that we know where it will be flowing at specific times. And for a while, this kind of felt like it was working. The rivers were doing a lot for us. We weren't seeing those negative consequences of it. But as climate changes, we're starting to really see that the rivers are now pretty vulnerable and we've put too much control on them and they can't take care of themselves anymore. They're unhealthy and they're degraded. And as scientists, oftentimes what we want to do is we want to fix the river, and that's called restoration. And whenever we talk about restoration, especially river restoration, the very first question that comes up is, well, what do we restore it to? What did the rivers used to look like? And a lot of folks will imagine something like this. These somewhat famous drawings they were drawn many different times between like the mid 1600s through the 1800s. You got lots of these sketches as people were coming into North America and trying to draw and describe the rivers that they saw. And if you are thinking of this, you're part of the way there. In these drawings, the rivers were freer. There was less control on them. You can see them bending and braiding and branching and anastomosing and anabranching and all of the big jargony words to say that this river was more wild. This river was more free. This river made its own choices and took care of itself, and it also took care of the ecosystems around it. But if you're imagining this river specifically like this drawing, then I regret to inform you, or maybe I'm excited to inform you, that something really important was missing right about when these drawings were made. Now, I'm a river scientist by training, and my whole discipline took off about 200 years ago. In the 1880s, we really started to solidify river science as a field. We were understanding how terraces form, the cycle of erosion. We're starting to think about floods in the early 1900s. The great names of my field, Strahler and Hack and Horton and Powell and Davis and Gilbert, went rafting the rivers of North America and used physics and math to write equations for everything they saw. And it wasn't until the later 1900s that we started to think critically about how are we affecting rivers? How does land use change a river? How does our pumping of groundwater affect them? How does the installation of dams affect them? And everything that these guys wrote about was true to what they saw. All of that math, all of that physics, it accurately described the rivers that they were exploring. However, what they saw was not what rivers should be, and it's not what rivers had been, because something very important was very, very recently missing. And yes, I am clearly talking about beavers here. This little shadow of a beaver has been haunting my field for centuries. And I bring up the timescales of this because to me, it feels like river science is old. It's a couple centuries old. But for the beaver, that's absolutely nothing. Beavers have been building their dams across North America and Eurasia for at least 7.5 million years. It could be as many as 25 million years. We don't know exactly when this behavior developed, but either way, we're talking millions and millions and millions of years of beavers shaping the rivers, beavers defining the rivers, beavers controlling, maintaining, and being part of those rivers and encouraging them to be complex in ways that you can't achieve without the beaver. And so their footprint on this planet extends much, much farther back than the footprint of Strahler and Horton and Hack and all those guys. Beavers have that knowledge of what rivers were, and maybe they don't write it down with physics and math, but it's in their little heads, and they understand it on a deep and evolutionary timescale. So I think about beavers more like a geologic force. They're operating on similar timescales to plate tectonics, to glaciers, to ice ages. They're a large force of nature. And they're large not just in time, they were also quite large in space. What you're looking at here is the river and stream network of the lower 48 of the United States. Every single one of those blue lines is a river, stream, creek, brook, or waterway. And every single one of those blue lines had beavers. We had a lot of beavers in North America. In fact, we had 100 to 400 million of them before the fur trade. That's about a beaver for every kilometer of habitable stream, and that's about 1 billion beaver dams across this continent. Now, if anybody went out today and tried to get a permit to build 1 billion little dams, it would probably take them 1 billion years because that permit's never going to happen. Because we know how influential building 1 billion small dams would be. It's a huge deal. But when it was beavers doing it, we just kind of overlooked that. And it can be hard to imagine what it was like when we had that many beaver dams, when we had that many beavers. Because right during the fur trade, we took that population from its peak of 100 to 400 million down to 100,000. We killed almost all of them, and this was intentional. This was for fur. This was also for control of land, for control of people. There were policies designed to completely destroy the beaver population to make it more economically advantageous for some fur trappers to work on the West Coast and others to not. We were completely mishandling the beavers of this continent, and we might not have even realized it at the time, although I suspect that we did. So we went from that 100 to 400 million beavers down to 100,000 in the geologic blink of an eye. This happened in about 200 years. And when that happened, we lost all those animals. We lost the engineers. And then all those dams that they built were suddenly unmaintained. And they were being pulled apart by people to make it easier to navigate the rivers. They're being removed to make logging more easy. And we had a continental scale reshaping of our river network. Everything was different. The rivers were simplifying, the creeks were degrading and incising. They were entering this novel state that they had never been in because for the last 7 million years, they had been controlled, maintained, and defined by beaver engineering. And then, after all that happened, that's when Strahler and Horton and Hack and Gilbert and Davis and Powell rafted the rivers and wrote the math and physics equations to describe what they are. And that's what most of us consider to be the definition of a river today. But I'm here to tell you that those definitions are what the rivers were during a very disturbed point in our history. And what the rivers should be is not defined by those men, it was defined by beavers. Now, luckily, today, beavers are on their way back. We're up to 10 to 30 million in the continent, which is about 10% of the historic population. This is a feel-good story because it's great to see an animal return that was unjustly removed. This is also an amazing story because as beavers move back into those habitats that they once called home, we're watching them rapidly restore and improve them. In this sequence of pictures, you can see Susie Creek, which is in northeastern Nevada. It is an overgrazed, incised, unhealthy creek that had most of its water pumped away for gold mining or agriculture, and it barely supported an ecosystem anymore. It was pretty much just a muddy ditch. But then beavers showed up, and in the span of just a couple of decades, that was completely reversed. The habitat was restored, the wetlands returned, a diversity of plants and animals once again were able to find this place and call it home. And that is what beavers do. They can move into all sorts of streams that are not in good shape and return them to what they were. Not what they were when Strahler, Horton, and Hack saw them, what they were for the millions of years before that. So I think that we could probably agree, based on that, that beavers are really nature's engineer, and they are powerful. This is a classic beaver dam landscape that you might find here in the Upper Great Lakes region. We have fast water, we have slow water, we have deep water, shallow water, warm water, cold water. We've got that little dam with water spilling over it. We've got deeper pools behind it. We have grasses and reeds and shrubs and lilies and trees of all types and sizes. It is a messy, complicated habitat, and this is what we had a billion of. But today we don't. Today we have about a billion of these very simple channels, very unhealthy channels. They get to be this way from having us put too much control on them or us disrespect them and let them become overgrazed or have all the water taken away without thinking about what's the purpose of that river beyond moving water. What is the ecosystem that it supports? Now, restoring these is a challenge for us as people. Some of our more complicated restoration efforts can cost $1 million a mile to restore a stream like this. But luckily, we don't have to do that. We don't have to spend that money because we have beavers. And what beavers will do is they'll see this and they'll move in and build a little dam. Now, these dams are leaky structures. They're made of sticks and stones and mud. Water flows through them, over them, around them, underneath them. They're not stopping the water. It's a flowing system, but it is slowed down. And you start to reconnect the stream back up to the floodplain. And as it does, water can seep back into the soil. It can provide more nutrients and water for all those plants and build back up our riparian or creekside ecosystem. Now, busy as a beaver is a phrase for a real reason. They are not just fun alliterations. Beavers are not going to stop when they've got one dinky little dam. They want to expand it. They want that dam to be longer, taller, stronger. They want to hold back more water. Now, for those of you that have not had the pleasure of seeing beavers in real life, these are semi-aquatic rodents that weigh anywhere from 40 up to 110 pounds as an adult. And that 110-pounder did come out of Wisconsin. Now, beavers have a big paddle tail on their back. They've got big webbed feet on the back side of them as well. And then on the front, it's hands, not webbed. So this is an animal that is built for aquatic travel. It's a great swimmer. It can hold things in its hands while it's swimming. This is not an animal that's built for overland travel. You can't run very fast or very far if you're shaped like a bowling ball with a paddle tail and webbed back feet. And that's what beavers are. And I bring all of this up because a lot of people think that beavers stop with the dam and that that's their main engineering feat. But beavers do have to navigate the landscape. They have to go out and find more food, find more building materials, and they don't want to walk over land. And so they've figured out something else they can engineer, and that's canals. So beavers will actually go and excavate. They'll dig little micro streams that radiate out across valley bottoms like a big spider web of water. And this is their highway system. This is their city streets. A beaver can float logs home in this. A beaver can get startled by a predator and jump in and swim to safety. And this is a really important part of their engineering. It's the excavation of these canals that takes a beaver's influence from a local pond-sized patch to a wetland that can be many, 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 many times larger than the pond itself. Now, to get some terms straight before I move forwards, I've got a diagram here of a beaver dam and a beaver wetland. We've got the dam on the left-hand side. This is what's made of sticks and stones and mud. Its only purpose is to slow down the water and to hold some of it back. Beavers do not live in their dam. They live in their lodge. That is a separate structure. Oftentimes, it's a dome-shaped pile of sticks, but sometimes they'll den straight into the banks of rivers or large lakes, and then you won't see that lodge, but the beavers might still be living there. The artist here did a great job of having the beavers in the water look like really good swimmers, hold their breath for 15 minutes, outswim any predator. They also did a good job of showing those beavers in land in the background, looking a little more cumbersome, a little more awkward. This is all very accurate. Now, when you see something like this, it is a little bit difficult at first to think, okay, I see how this is a change. This is not the stream from before. But this talk started with climate change. It started with global phenomena. It started with issues that affect watersheds or basins or states or regions. It's a much larger scale picture than a beaver pond or beaver wetland, which is true. You can visit these in the field, and this is undeniably a wilder and more complicated place than most of our simplified streams. But this is hard to picture what a billion of would have been like. It's not an easy thing for us to wrap our minds around. We haven't seen it for centuries. But luckily, you don't have to just imagine it. There are a few places scattered around the US where beavers are back at their full potential, and you can get a glimpse into what that history was like, into what it looked like when beavers were in charge. So here are two of my human field assistants on top of a beaver lodge. And as the drone rises in altitude, a beaver dam has just come into the right-hand side of the screen. It's going to continue to rise, and you'll see the canals that the beavers have dug, that spider web of water, and now a second dam is about to come in on the right-hand side of the screen. Beavers don't build just one dam. Beavers build networks of dams. A typical beaver family is going to build anywhere from maybe 3 or 4 up to 15 dams. They like to maintain a territory of 1 to 2 kilometers of stream length, so that's how much they want to be in control of. This beaver family, this wetland that you're looking at, this is 20% of what they are maintaining. It does not take that many beaver families to have a watershed scale impact. And even with the 10% of the historic population that we have left, that can be a really big impact. And if you're thinking, well, I'm not in one of these really flat landscapes. My beavers can't build these huge wide webs of water. Maybe I'm in the driftless, maybe I'm in the cliffs or the steeper streams. What does it look like there? Can beavers really have such a big influence? And the answer to that is yes, they can. When they can't build wide, they are going to build in sequence, dam after dam after dam. They want that same amount of area. And to do that, they're going to have to really pack those dams in. And so you get sort of this stair step or cascading pattern of beaver dams. And as they do all of this work, everything else starts to take note. You have different plants growing, you have animals finding this and settling down nearby. This is the ideal habitat for them. They have everything. Every habitat niche they could possibly want, with a few exceptions, is right here in the beaver wetlands. And so this is a very important place for us, especially as we're dealing with some of these really big challenges associated with climate change. And it's not because the beavers went out there and thought, I'm going to be the hero of the day, I'm going to fix this, that we get this. It's just the beavers' everyday behaviors, building dams, chewing on trees, digging canals, that they just so happen to be making one of our most climate resilient types of habitat that exists. Now I want to talk about 2 reasons beaver wetlands are special. Reason number 1 is the biodiversity on site. And then reason number 2 is their resilience and resistance to natural disasters. So let's start with the biodiversity. When I want to figure out what is living in and around my beaver wetlands, I will go put out game cameras. These are cameras that I can tie to things like trees, and they will trigger on motion and let me see what animals are there. I will also put these cameras at places that don't have beavers, and I will put these cameras at places that maybe currently don't have beavers but are going to get beavers so that I can get variations of before and after beaver arrival or beaver site, no beaver site control versus impact studies. Now, when I put these cameras out in a place like California, maybe I will see 10 different species in a given week of looking at footage. And that might sound like a lot, which is nice, but it's maybe 8 different birds and then a raccoon and a skunk. And nothing against those 8 birds, raccoon and skunk. They are also very important. But you should see more than that. There should be more animals on site. That's not enough in a given week. But luckily, when a beaver shows up, or when I put my camera in a site that already has beavers, the numbers are much different. Everything is there. We have bobcats, foxes, we have herons, eagles, owls, all sorts of different ducks. I had to learn the names of so many ducks to do the ID in this footage. We have muskrats, we have otters, we have the beavers themselves, we have the big predators to the small predators, all the herbivores, and everything in between. And when we count them all, the numbers really add up. It does not take that long for the beaver wetland to have over 80 different species present, when before the beavers arrived, it was maybe sitting around 10. And all of these creatures are coming there because they want to live in the home created by this guy. So why do they choose the beaver wetland? Why do animals leave wherever they were before and show up at the beaver wetlands? What is it that they love so much? Well, that's where the resilience comes in, and that's where this sort of disaster protection is so important. If you imagine you're a fish or a frog or a salamander or a small mammal or a little bird, you probably aren't able to outrun, outswim, outfly, or outcrawl most disasters. If there's a drought, you're kind of stuck in place. If there's a fire, you're kind of stuck in place. If there's a flood, you're kind of stuck in place. So you better hope that the place you're living is a pretty safe place. Otherwise, you're hosed. And I should mention at this point, with those 80 different species that I counted, I didn't count the insects. Most of them are too small to trigger my game cameras. I didn't count the fish. I didn't count more than two different frogs, I think, because those frogs happen to jump right in front of the camera. They're often hidden from me. And so when I give that snapshot of biodiversity, I'm really just showing you the bigger animals. There's a whole foundation of life underneath that I didn't capture that I promise you is also more rich and biodiverse. So let's get back to resilience. I want you to imagine a stream without beavers. It's simple, not a lot going on. This is kind of just like a conveyor belt of water, maybe a little bit of an ecosystem around it, but it's narrow. Very different than where we have the beavers. They build their dams, they dig those canals, everything is more complicated. Now, when we have a wet period, whether that's the annual spring rains, maybe it's an atmospheric river if you're out west, maybe it's a hurricane if you're in the south, maybe it's just a big thunderstorm or a rain on snow event if you're up here in the Great Lakes. No matter why, there's too much water. As soon as there is too much water and you try to put it in our streams that are unhealthy, there's not enough room for them. And so it starts to make a flood wave. Now, if you imagine that you turn on your garden hose and the water's kind of trickling out and it's a nice, good flow of water, that is a healthy delivery of water. Now, put your thumb over most of that garden hose, and the same amount of water is now confined to a very little space, and it becomes this really aggressive spray, and you can kind of clean your deck off with it. That's basically what happens here. You have a lot of water confined to a very small space, and it gets aggressive, and it gets really powerful, and water will make space for itself if it can. And it can in the earth. What it does is it rips the streams to pieces. It absolutely pulls the banks apart. It pulls the plants in, pulls the roads in, it pulls houses in. It makes room. And unfortunately, when floodwaters can't get to the floodplain, they wind up degrading the stream further. They cut it down deeper into the earth and make it so that the next time there's a flood, it's even worse. It's even harder for it to get to the floodplain. But when there's a beaver wetland to interrupt it, it's a completely different story. The water is deeper, it's wider. Those canals that move the beavers around so efficiently also move around the water. It gets it onto the floodplain where it is flowing through all of this vegetation, slowing it down, knocking the debris out, giving it time to sink back into the soil. And it still does go downstream. Remember, beavers do not stop the water, they're just slowing it down. But as it goes downstream, it's less powerful, it's less destructive, same amount of water, just less damage. So instead of seeing erosion and soil loss and scouring every time we have a rain event, we instead see water being spread and slowed and stored. Now imagine the same situation, but we're looking with depth into the earth. And I want you to focus on the roots of the plants. You can see them sticking down into the soil. Now in this first picture, we're in a rainy period. So I have infiltrating precipitation. Basically, it's raining or snow's melting, water's coming in from above. Our streams that are degraded don't have a very big impact on our soil or groundwater systems. The water moves through too fast, and there's very few physical points of contact between surface water and groundwater. In the stream with beavers, it's much more connected. We have that big wide pond. All of these streams, or all of these canals, I should say, are like little micro streams, and that's effectively pinning your groundwater up by the surface. But when it's raining, all the plants have water from above, so they don't care if there's beavers or no beavers, at least in terms of water availability. But they really, really care when we enter a drought. We've had some really bad spring droughts. We've had some really bad summer droughts. Droughts are definitely part of our future going forwards and probably in a more intense way than we're used to. And during these droughts, the plants rely on water that's underground. And if they can't reach any, they'll start to wilt and wither and shut down. And that's exactly what we see in our stream without beavers. And it's the opposite of what's going on in the stream with beavers. In the stream with beavers, there was so much water stored during those high flow events that once we enter a drought condition, the plants don't even care. They still have plenty of water beneath the earth. And this is something I've studied in my own research, and I found that the beavers and their wetlands can resist drying for years and years on end of drought. It's not just like a 1 week period. We've done some ancient work as well, and we found that beavers have persisted in landscapes during multi-century droughts. They are good at dealing with dry periods because they are excellent at saving water during whatever wet periods you have, no matter how small they are. Now, what happens if into this mix you add in, well, I think that this is only a problem out west. We don't have that kind of drought here. I'm the first to tell you my study on this was out west. It was in arid landscapes in Nevada. That's where I saw the beavers withstand drought, which I think is even more impressive and probably speaks stronger to their ability to do this. But if you want to think about a more local example or a more similar type of ecosystem, you can look to some of my colleagues in Canada. where they have published on the same topic, except they were looking in boreal wetlands. And they found the same thing. The beaver wetlands are much better at resisting droughts than any other type of wetland and than rivers without beavers. So beavers are especially good at this. They've had millions of years to figure out how to resist drought. And also, if you have something that comes after that drought, like one careless match or power line or a campfire or a car engine or an arsonist or whatever's starting your wildfires today, what is going to burn is whatever is dry. And unfortunately, that includes our river corridors. That includes some of our wetlands. That includes a lot of places that really shouldn't have been dry in the past, but we're finding them drier and drier today. But where we have the beavers, they're really good at resisting the droughts because they're really good at slowing down the floods, which then means they're really good at stopping wildfires. And usually at this point, when I'm talking about this, folks are like, all right, Emily, this is a step too far. I believe that beavers can interact with a flood because a flood is water and beavers build dams and we know dams and floods interact. That's fine, whatever. I don't know that they can fight fires. This feels like maybe it's a little outside the job description of nature's engineer. They're not nature's firefighter. To which I would say, I understand that thought. This feels like a stretch that you have this 80-pound semi-aquatic rodent out there fighting fires that we as people are struggling to deal with. But you don't have to just believe me. You can see this with your own eyes. You can look at the streams without beavers and compare them to the streams with beavers. And you can see the fire comes down our hill slopes, it comes across the landscape, burns right through valley bottoms and up the other side when there's no beavers. But when you add beavers into the mix, the fire still comes down the hill slopes or across the landscape. Beavers don't work the whole area. They're just working down by the rivers and by the streams. And sometimes an ember will blow to the other side and it'll keep burning. But that area the beavers worked is protected. And when you look more closely, it's not enough to have two threads of stream instead of one. It's not enough that that stream was a little bit bendy and a little wiggly. It wasn't a straight line, super incised stream. It was just a kind of incised stream. It doesn't matter. It still burned. All of those little white blotches that you see in that left-hand picture are piles of ash where there used to be trees. You can see how dark and sort of grayish the soil looks here. That's because the soil is burnt. The roots are burnt. The seed bank is burnt. And sometimes these fires are so hot and so severe that it's not good fire. It's not the kind of fire that revitalizes what's in the earth. It destroys it. And then we have a new restoration challenge because everything is gone and we have to start from scratch. We have to bring in all the plants quickly before we get those invasives that are so good at colonizing post-disturbance landscapes. Except where we have beavers, different story. Where we have the beavers, we still have that fire coming in. It's still super severe in this area. It's not like this was a low-key fire where the beavers were and it was really intense where they weren't. You can look at sort of the bottom right hand of the beaver picture, and there's one of those little blotches of white ash pile where there was a tree, and then you get into the beaver wetland and everything's green. You can see that pond, that nice big cool pool of water. You can see the canals they dug, reflecting light back up the drone that took this photo. It's a completely different story. There's mature plants, there's mature animals, the seed bank is intact, and the habitat is protected. And I really wanted to know in my own research, is this something that we can rely on? Is this, beavers fighting fire, beavers protecting their habitats during the worst of natural disasters, something that happens consistently, or is it rare? Is this something we can count on, or is this just a fun phenomenon that when it happens, it's great, but don't rely on it? To answer that question, my very first study looked at 5 fires at 5 Western states in the US. Now, I picked these fires because they were relatively big. I thought they were pretty big at the time. I don't think that anymore. Come back to that. And there were a good number of beavers within each of these different fire scars. And the other thing they had, not in common, but intentionally not in common, was that there were a lot of different landscapes captured within these fires. We had grasslands, we had forests of different varieties, we had flatter areas, we had steeper areas, we had canyons, we had valleys, we had places that were in drought, we had places that weren't in drought, tons of variety, which meant that the only things consistent were fire and beavers. I figured I could look through these 5 different places and find those specific conditions that lead to beaver wetlands not burning during fire versus where they do burn. And to do that, I want you to imagine that you walk along every single creek in all those different fires from a designated starting point to a designated stopping point. And you're going to do it before the fire, and then you're going to do it again right after the fire. As you walk, you're taking notes. How green are the plants? Are they alive or are they burnt? And do I see any signs of beaver? Beaver dams, beaver lodges, beaver canals, things like that. This is basically what I did, except I can't time travel and go back in time to all these fires. So what I had to do was use satellite data to extract the pixels or the greenness along the river corridors. And then I also used high resolution aerial images and satellite to find where there were beavers. Now I'm going to show you just a little bit of data from the Mantor Fire, which burned in Sequoia National Forest in a place called the Domeland Wilderness. Now, at the time of the fire, I thought this was like, wow, big fire, super intense, 79,000 acres. Small spoiler alert that is me in front of a beaver dam there. So at least the beavers are back today. But just because they were there today doesn't mean they were there back in 2000 when this fire happened, and doesn't mean they survived. So I went back and I found all the places the beavers were in historical imagery. And then I go through and I find all that data to see how green they are. And this is my workflow. But it's really easy to get lost in those numbers and to forget what these fires are actually like. So I want to contextualize the challenge that beavers were up against here by reading you a quote from the LA Times. "It is a humbling expression of nature, walls of flame 70 feet high, twice as high as the nearest tree, leaping through canyons and valleys, at times in 5 directions at once. Left behind, quite literally, is scorched earth." So this is a bad fire. This isn't a good fire. This is a fire that is destroying forests. This is a fire that is burning too hot, that's leaving behind, sorry, that's my cat, leaving behind some really challenging landscapes to recover. So I'm now going to show you a little bit of the data. On the x-axis, the horizontal one, that is our distance along the creek profile. So you start at 0, and then you walk, and then out at 4,000, you've walked 4,000 meters along the creek. The y-axis is our greenness, NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. A lower number means there's less or fewer green plants, and a higher number means there are more green plants. Now, before the fire, the data looked something like this. Now, if you look at this kind of satellite data all day, every day, you can already interpret it. But if not, no worries. I've put this dashed line on for your reference. This is at 0.3. I expect a healthy riparian zone to be above 0.3 during the growing season all summer long. If it's not, that means something's going on. Either it's really stressed out, maybe it's burnt, maybe it's really bad drought, or in this case, a couple of those little dips below the line, that's where we just had a lot of rocks and plants weren't growing on the rocks. And so within a given pixel, it showed up as a little bit lower greenness, not because the plants there were unhealthy, just because there were so few plants in that pixel. So this was before the fire. I looked at this data. This is a healthy ecosystem. Great. This is after the fire. For a while, it looks like the data is kind of the same, and then it really drops off, and there's a big difference. And that difference is very cool when you overlay the position of the beaver dams as little black boxes on the x-axis. Where we have those beavers working, these 2 lines, before the fire and after the fire, were not statistically different from one another. This was within the normal variation you could get year to year just from having maybe a drier year and a wetter year. This was effectively saying in where the beavers were working, there was no effect after the fire. Where the beavers were not working, there was absolutely an effect. That greenness is well below that 0.3 threshold, and it stays below it the entire rest of your walk. Everything is burnt. Now, to make this difference that I just described a little more clear, I'm now plotting the difference. So what you're seeing here is basically fire suppression. And I know fire suppression is a loaded word these days. We're not suppressing the entire fire. We're just protecting the sensitive wetland ecosystems from the fire, especially from the fires that are burning too hot and not in a way that's good for them. So here, a lower number means there's less fire impact, there was less burning. A higher number means there was more fire impact, more burning. And you can see where those beavers are, we have a lot less burning. And I didn't see this in just one area. I saw this in every single creek I studied. I saw that no matter where you were, the beaver dammed areas were, on average, burning 3 times less intensely than the rivers that did not have beavers. I'm not looking out at the hill slopes compared to the rivers. I'm comparing river to river, and the only thing that's different is there a beaver there or not? And I got this study published and was probably the highlight of my career is getting the title Smokey the Beaver through peer review. That's where science goes to lose the joy if you've ever had to write a paper and submit it, but it is where it goes to get that stamp of scientific rigor. So that's great. But I was happy to get this published. I felt like we have solved the wildfire crisis. We've solved the climate crisis. We just need to rely on beavers to do their thing for us. Great. I'm done. We're seeing the value of these to so many other creatures. When this photo was taken of the Mantor fire back in 2000 by the Burned Area Emergency Response Team, they actually had photo after photo after photo of beaver dams and beaver wetlands because of this. They were noticing these are the green patches, and they'd fly down really close and they'd see, oh, there's a black bear hanging out there. There's fish still here. All the other animals are coming to these spots because it is safe for them. And it also, I love to show this picture because it lets me make a really dumb joke, which is that it looks like Smokey Bear got a helping hand from Smokey the Beaver. So I have not gotten the Forest Service to adopt this new mascot yet, but I will continue to work on that for the rest of my career. And my career will keep going because the challenge of fire continues to increase, and the challenge of disasters continues to increase. We're seeing mega fires instead of normal fires. We're seeing mega droughts and mega floods. And all of these mega things are different. They're bigger than we've ever seen before. When it comes to fire, these are the fires that wipe towns off the map. These are the fires that destroy homes and communities. These are the fires that we can't control. These are the fires that we think are a Western US problem, but they're just up north with our neighbors in Canada. Ontario has these every single year. These are the fires that are rapidly becoming a global phenomenon. And this is what beavers have to deal with. But luckily, they're doing just fine. In my research, I looked specifically at megafires and found all the different beaver wetlands within them that I could, and put it all together and found that if you are in the river near where there are beaver dams and a megafire is happening around you, about 89% of that area that the beavers are touching is fire refugia, meaning it is a safe place to be during the fire. If you're in the river without beavers, that number drops to 60%, which is still not terrible, but it's maybe a little better than a coin flip. And if I'm a hiker caught out in a fire, I'm going to pick the beaver wetland over the river without beavers because it's safer. And I'm certainly not going to stay out of the rivers because we're only looking at about 40% fire refugia there, which is far too low. These fires are intense, they are a challenge, and we are very lucky that beavers have risen to this challenge. And of course, we can see this. We can see the power of this animal with our own eyes. We can see the forests that have gone up in smoke, that are burnt to a crisp. We can see the wetlands that are preserved and intact. We can see the recovery bleeding back out into the landscape after the fire. This photo you're looking at here is from 5 years after one of these mega fires. And you can see how little recovery has happened in the heart of that burnt forest. But you can also see the sort of fringe of greenness pushing back out. And that's because you've protected everything here. The beavers themselves, of course, but also all of the plants, all of the seeds, all of the fruits, all of the flowers, all of the pollinators, all of the creatures that can help spread that back around after. So these are not just a place for safety, but they are also a nucleus for recovery post-disturbance. And if you're like, all right, that was too much Western US data, I don't believe you that this is my problem. I think this is a Western US phenomena. I don't see how beavers are quite as important here. And that is a fair concern. I hear it quite a bit living in Minnesota now. But I want to start off by pointing out that this has already been studied by somebody that's not me. And up in Ontario, some of my colleagues found that over 90% of the fire-resistant wetlands were associated with beaver dams. Same number as I found out west, exact same thing is happening up in the boreal shield, these soggy, flat landscapes. Even them, when they have fire, the beavers are uniquely good at disrupting it and protecting their wetland homes. And I have, of course, looked at this in Minnesota. I need to have some of my own local data in my back pocket. And so I looked at the Greenwood fire that burned back in 2021 up in northern Minnesota. And I found places where there were beaver dams. On the left is a satellite image of beaver dams. I've traced the dam crests with a little black line. And on the right, I've looked at them after a wildfire. And here, red means high severity and blue means low severity or not burnt. And you can see where those beavers were doing their thing, we still had the same effect. Looking at the burn severity data, this looks identical to what I see out west. This looks identical to what I see in Alaska, to what I see in Ontario, to what I see in Oklahoma, to what I see in Colorado. This is a phenomenon that seems to be pretty universal for beavers. They can resist disturbance and protect their wetland homes. During fire, during droughts, during floods, this is what they do and have done for millions and millions of years. And what's cool here is that even in places where the beavers are gone, in places where the ponds haven't been full for a couple decades because the beavers are maybe being removed by us still, and we do still do that at quite a large scale, we still see some effect. We still see some fire suppression, even if the beavers have been absent for 20 years. And when I see this kind of data, it does make me wonder, how much of the disaster resistance, how much of the fire resistance and drought resistance that's baked into our landscapes today is thanks to those ghosts of beavers past that had been engineering it, changing the soils, changing the plant communities for millions of years prior. And we need to think about these questions because our future includes fire. Our future includes worse droughts. Our future includes worse floods. We aren't protected up here from this. Just last spring, we had 3 significant wildfires burn in northern Minnesota, and seeing these images on the news, it was like I was living in California again. It was like I was back in Colorado with my family. This is a phenomenon that is our problem too, and we should do our best to get ahead of it so that we aren't playing catch up when we have had the luxury of knowing ahead of time that we could work with nature's engineers to protect more of our sensitive habitats. These patches are so important. This is the view you would have had from inside a beaver wetland around a wildfire. Around you, everything's fine. The plants have their leaves, the water is cool and clear, the insects are buzzing, the fish are jumping, the birds are flapping around. It's a great thing. But then in the rest of the landscape, we have that fire. And this, to me, says what our job is. The beavers are doing their job. The beavers are protecting the wetlands when we let them. The forests are vulnerable. The beavers cannot work the forests. That's our job. How can we protect our forests? And why do we put so much of our effort into trying to struggle against the beavers when we could just let them do their thing and work together instead of opposition? We're wasting time and effort and money fighting nature's engineers when we could be partnering with them. And they're valuable too. If you're not motivated by any of that, maybe you're motivated by dollar signs. These scientists put together a study, I wasn't affiliated with this one, back in 2020, where they looked at all the good things beavers are doing for us. Recreational hunting and fishing opportunities, greenhouse gas sequestration, water supply, water quality. They remove agricultural pollutants, heavy metals, and E. coli from the water. They moderate extreme events, and this study did not include fire in their analysis, so bump this number up quite a bit. And then also habitat and biodiversity provisioning. And they found that beavers are doing about $179,000 per square mile they engineer per year. Now imagine how many square miles we had when beavers were at their peak. And imagine how many more we could have if we worked with them more quickly, more smartly today. So now what? If you're feeling energized and you're ready to jump on in and get on the beaver train and do something with this energy, is it maybe time to start airdropping beavers across North America again? And this is an again. We did this in the 1950s, and you can look it up on YouTube. I won't go into extreme detail, but in short, people wanted to get beavers back out in the forests and the mountains, and so they packed them into boxes, put the boxes on airplanes, put a parachute on the box, pushed the box out of the airplane, dropped the beaver in the forest, and called it a success. This is not the next step. It's not the next step to just do this with drones and make it more modern. The next step is to think about our relationship with beavers. Beavers are keystone species. Beavers are ecosystem engineers. Beavers are second only to us in their ability to modify the physical earth. And we still kill so many beavers. We kill tens and thousands of them through the federal government every year. We kill probably hundreds of thousands more across the country at state and local levels. We destroy their dams. If you remember back to that picture of Susie Creek, we'll take that wetland, blow up the dam, and send it right back being that ditch of water. We like the ditch of water because it's easier to control. This is not good. We have a lot of work to do on our relationship with this animal. That's the next step. Protect the beavers we have, work with them where we can, and when we can't, think about a compromise. Think about a way to move forward that doesn't just involve destroying everything. Even if it's easier to kill the beaver, remove the dam, that's not a permanent solution. New beavers will be back next year, and you will forever be on this cycle of removal. Instead, we could do things like wrap our favorite trees with fencing. And then we can use our human brains to learn from this and realize that when the beaver on site weighs 80 pounds, probably use heavier fencing, because in this case, it just reared up and mushed that fence down and went for the tree anyways. So better fences. We can also put pipes through their dams and take that water level down a little bit. We don't have to have all of our roads and trails and houses underwater and just let the beavers have free rein. We can compromise. We can say, you can have a wetland, but not that tall. Take the water down a notch. And then the beavers either accept it or they don't, but either way, the problem is solved. And critically, we can start thinking about relocating beavers. When there is a problem, when we cannot deal with that beaver in sight, instead of killing them, there are plenty of places that actively want them back still and don't have them yet. Remember, we're only at 10% the historic population. So what does it take to move beavers? In some places, it just takes more people willing to do it. In other places, it's going to take policy and law change because it's illegal. For example, here in Minnesota, you cannot move beavers. When I think about our beaver future, and I get asked a lot, what does it look like? What's the goal? It's not a specific number. It's not a percent of the historic population. We won't ever be back at 100. That's impossible. But I don't even necessarily have a number to give you that we should be at. It's not a distribution of them. It's not they need to be here and not there, or they need to be in all these places. What it is to me when I think about our beaver future and what it should look like is it's a time when someone goes out and they're walking and they see a beaver. And their first thought is, wow, this is amazing. This is the animal that has shaped the home that I love. This is an animal that defined the streams and creeks that I love to fish in, that I love to swim in. This is an animal that is so powerful that it can deal with disasters that we're still learning how to deal with on our own. Incredible. I'm so lucky that I got to see this here, especially because we had almost lost them. And I think when that is what people's first thoughts are, then everything else will fall into place. We'll have beavers back in more places. We'll have that benefit at a much larger scale. But it really does start with our attitudes, not necessarily with a policy or a law or program. It starts in our own minds and our relationships with our homes. So thanks for listening to the Beaver Spiel. And I think I have just a couple minutes left for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Fairfax. Yes, we have questions, and I will pose the first one to you. In your work, what have you found to be the person or the organization, the decider or the gatekeeper, usually that makes decisions on whether beavers come or go, and how do you deal with them?
That's a great question. And, it varies a lot. I have been places where we have found that, for example, the Army Corps is really resistant to a beaver restoration project. But then I've been in other places where the Army Corps is our biggest advocate for a beaver restoration project. There's some places where the local DNR office is doing everything they can to support us. And then a different DNR branch is really nervous about this and doing everything they can to thwart us. And so I know it's not like a nice clear-cut answer, but the real answer is when there is a beaver and you want to protect it or a wetland and you want to protect it, get everybody involved in that conversation. Make sure you're inviting everyone to the table, whether they feel like friends or foes on first glance. Chances are most people that are going to come to that conversation care deeply about the land and they care deeply about the water and they are expressing it in the way that feels the most sound to them. And that's where you then take that opportunity to educate and to talk about what do beavers actually do? They've been gone for 200 years. They're this weird, mysterious, and chaotic animal. Let's talk about the myths, let's talk about the truths, and then we can have a conversation about what to do with that information once we're all on that same page.
And what are some of the resources? I know there's Beaver Institute and there's Beaver Innovations in Minnesota. So how do people learn more and get help?
Yeah, so the Beaver Institute is a great place to get resources. This is a national organization that houses a lot of different documents and guides to living with beavers, to partnering with them. They also have a Beaver Help hotline, so you can actually send an email and just describe your problem, and then one of the Beaver Institute staff will respond to you with suggestions and resources to solve your specific problem. And it's a person, it's not a chatbot. I know them, they're great, which is wonderful. And then also on the Beaver Institute website, you can go to a map and like find your local beaver conflict specialist. And so Beaver Innovations is a company that I helped found here in Minnesota that does that with one of my colleagues at the University of Minnesota through the Use Startup program. There's also Clay Frazier in Wisconsin. There are folks in Iowa and Ohio and Indiana and Illinois. And so there are plenty of resources all around and people who are trained and ready to help you keep beavers on site.
What other species of more than human life are beavers dependent on? Can we help beaver populations recover indirectly by working on riparian native plant community restoration?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when a beaver wants to establish a new territory, it's going to look for the best quality habitat it can find that's not occupied by another beaver. They're very territorial, and that they think they can make a home out of. And one of the things they're looking for is food. Now, they can eat a lot of different things. All plants, they don't eat fish. That's a myth. Um, but they have favorites. And so if you really want them to settle down in a specific spot, plant their favorites. And that's going to be willows, cottonwoods, aspen, birch, some maples. Things they don't love, pines, conifers. They really don't like that taste and feel of the tannins and the resin on their teeth. And so with that information, I guess you have two things. When you want the beavers, plant those riparian hardwoods and those riparian trees and shrubs. They love them. Let there be lilies and cattails because they love them. And then your beaver will come and eat them and keep those aquatic perennials in check. If you don't want the beavers, maybe plant some more pines and some more of those conifers because that's going to make a less ideal habitat for them.
Okay, let's squeeze one more question in. There's so many good ones. So the increased water spread from beavers in their little canals is something that sometimes like watershed districts don't like because they're in charge of managing that water to keep it contained. So how do you work with a land manager or conservation district?
I, in those situations, really try to describe why the canals are important and also acknowledge that they make it a nightmare to monitor the system hydrologically. I'm a water scientist. I love to be able to stick in a flow meter and know exactly how much water is coming in and out of a given stretch of stream. And when instead of having one in and one out, you have one in and then 400 different outs, that's a huge amount of work. And I don't want to diminish that concern. It's really difficult. The good news is beavers don't dam absolutely everything, so just move your sample point a little bit downstream to where it does go back to more of a single channel form and take your measurement there. Um, the other thing I do is I talk about why the canals are special. So the canals, that is a passage point for fish. That is a passage point for amphibians and turtles, all the things that people worry about not being able to get past the beaver dams. Most of them actually can go straight through. The beaver dams are quite leaky, or over some of the overspill points. But a lot of them will take the canals, and that's the highway system for a lot of other things too, not just the beavers. So pointing out that there's benefits that aren't being really well described or quantified. And then also saying, like, I get it, the hydrology measurement, it's really annoying. The beavers don't pull permits or blueprints, and they don't do anything that lets us work easily with them from an engineering standpoint, but it's worth it.